Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. Let's get started. Redditors who walked off the job without notice, what straw broke the camel's back? I used to be in management in a massive grocery store where one of the features of the brand is running a store on an absolute minimum of staff to keep prices low. I was at the bottom of the management ladder and was basically a floor manager. I had some management duties, but I also had to do the same things that other store employees did, like cashiering, running stock, and so on. I was also the store's health and safety representative, and 2 weeks ago I was given the quarterly report to finish. It included checking that all mechanical parts were working properly, making notes on any possible safety issues, watching employees do their work to make sure they were using the right lifting techniques, and other things. A lot of go to this piece of equipment, so these things, pick a tick if it does this, and an X if it doesn't, checklists. To be thorough, I'd need 2 hours of uninterrupted time to do the report. That way, I wouldn't just wing it or make up details. People had already caught us because the morning managers were lying about temperature control readings. They weren't taking them in the morning, but instead filled them out with fake numbers while they were in the office. I asked management every shift for 2 weeks to give me time to do the report, even if it was just 30 minutes a day for a few shifts. I was always turned down and told that we were too busy and that I needed to work on the floor. So the day before I was supposed to give this report to the region manager, I still hadn't been given time. I pushed the manager again, and this time he gave me an hour. Since we were already very busy, I told him straight out that an hour wasn't enough time to finish it all. I promised to do what I could, but we'd still have to ask the region manager for a few more days before we could finish. The boss agreed, and I did what I could in the time I had. I change into my uniform and head into the warehouse to greet the manager and find out what needs to be done for the day. The next day was a Saturday, which is our busiest day of the week. What were his first words to me? "Good morning, Sarah. The health and safety report is due today, but you didn't finish it." It would be too mild to say I saw red. I asked and asked, but was turned down every time. I told him it wasn't enough time when he gave me a short amount of time to do it, and now I'm being told I didn't finish it? Really then? No. That's it. After my shift, I went back to the break room to change. The manager had been following me and trying to calm me down. He offered for me to take the day off fully paid so I could think about what to do. I told him straight out that I didn't need to think about it, and that was the last straw. Because I had worked there for a long time, he told me I couldn't just quit without giving notice. I laughed while he said this. I agreed to let him talk to me in the office for a few minutes so I could tell him straight out what a broken company and business model the whole thing was based on. He listened to me and didn't add anything except when I was leaving, and he told me I had to come back in for an exit interview because I was leaving without giving notice. I told him I would never come back to the store again and that upper management had my number. The biggest problem is that the company says if you don't hear anything, you're doing great, without writing it down, which is very discouraging because you never hear, "Whoa, great job, you moved 8 pallets of stock in the time it takes to move 6, or "Great job taking the initiative and doing this," or even "Thanks for staying back for 10 minutes to finish this last task." The constant, "Your scan rate was really low today, you gotta get it up, or we might have to have a conversation," or "You weren't quick enough with stock today," wears you down. I don't expect to get a pat on the back and a gold star every time I do something good, but I also don't think it's fair to always hear "you did poorly, gotta up your game," or "not good enough." The fact that my manager told me that was the cherry on top. That was longer than I expected. I think I might have been holding on to some of that for a bit too long. I wouldn't say I quit out of rage, but I was mad when I did it. I got a job at a small HOA management company. I already felt bad about the work because of it. HOAs are a bunch of S. On behalf of the HOA, I was in charge of the title paperwork when a house was bought. It was a mindless, boring H. It was awful all the time. When 3 weeks were up, I was the boss of everyone in the closing document facilitations department. The company as a whole had terrible turnaround. In any case, I never got the right training. I was shown what to do by a temp for half a day and then asked to leave. My boss wasn't terrible. She was nice, but she was way too busy. She didn't have time to teach me. That's what I thought, anyway. Didn't take long to hire 3 more people. These 2 people were trained by a different manager to work on different documents than I was. My manager trained a girl one-on-one for 2 weeks while I worked with her. Because of that, she was much better at this job than I was in every way. It was time for raises, and I was angry as H when I found out how much they were making and how much their raises were. I was hired for $12 an hour and was given a 25-cent raise. The other people in my department started out making $20 and got an extra $1 a year. It was said that my work was subpar and not meeting expectations. I wasn't properly trained, I told my boss over and over again. She said it wasn't true and that the temp trained me. He had no idea what he was doing. The last straw was when she told me to print all of my work around 4 p.m. and then sit with her with my 100-plus documents while she checked them for accuracy from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. She would get a red pen and make X's all the way across the page. She would give them back and say, "Fix these tomorrow." She only told me that something was wrong and not what it was. It was really annoying. Another manager also warned me that I was overprinting and they would have to start taking money off my pay for that. After I gave her my 2 weeks, she gave me a stack of papers that was about 3 feet high. The stack of papers was so big it was funny. She stated, "Since you can't do anything right and you're leaving in 2 weeks, maybe you can handle stapling every 3 pages together." I believe I stapled around 6 sets of 3 before I just got up and left. Another big problem was that the company used the same name as a well-known cable company near me, which pays well and is a good place to work. When I go for interviews, people are always like, "Wow, what happened there? Company name is a great company to work for." I always have to correct people and tell them that it's not that company. F that place and F HOAs. Which actions of your HOA or neighbors made you dislike them? We had a bad neighbor once, and not necessarily my story, but my dad's, as he's the homeowner and I was still very young. Anyway, it looks like the old neighbor and the old homeowner crossed the property line, but when my dad came home to do landscaping in the back, he saw that he didn't have much of a backyard. How did he do it? He had the property line checked again and found that the bad neighbor had not only lied to him about the line when he asked, but had also taken up to 20 feet of my dad's land by itself. It was a lot of land. I can't say how many square feet it was. So my dad took it all back and ripped out the ugly ivy. It was absolutely beautiful. Then he built a big wooden fence around his yard so he wouldn't have to look at his bad neighbor's ugly backyard. HOA rules only cover front yards. For the first few years, everything was fine. When I was 10 or 12 years old, some of the wooden boards on the fence started to buckle and leaves and stems started to poke through. Sure enough, the bad neighbor let all kinds of ivy, plants, and other junk grow up to our fence through the 2-foot gap between our fences. This was done so that utility workers could reach the phone pole from the street. We went full Rambo while our bad neighbor and his wife went on a week-long vacation. They told us ahead of time so we could watch their house like everyone else does. Using any sharp tool, a knife, blades, plant killer, loppers, clippers, or anything else, he cut everything back and down along his chain link fence and in the 2-foot gap between the fences for utilities. He did this all weekend and into the following week. By the law, were we right? I have no idea, but the bad neighbor didn't notice, and even though we used weed killer and salt on the path, nothing's grown back there since. No, we didn't spray his garden, we just cut down the plants that were growing in and on his chain fence and between our fences. But yeah, he was the neighbor whom we hated fiercely. My mother's neighbor mostly, but I caught a small portion of it while living with her at the beginning of 2020. When I was young, my mom bought her first house, which was in a row of townhouses. At first, the neighbor with whom she shares a wall seemed nice, but soon she and her live-in boyfriend were getting into loud fights that could be heard all the way in my mom's house. He was allegedly abusing her, but she never showed any physical signs of abuse, and their fights sounded more like she was abusing him. The neighbor called the police many times to report this. In any case, I digress. Once there was a really bad fight, he left. She somehow got into the hospital and seemed to really enjoy being there. He tried to go back for some of his things but couldn't get in. He then broke her faucet by breaking in through a window like a normal person would. After getting his things, he left. She came home from the hospital, he moved back in, and everything was fine again. The problem wasn't the fighting, though. Not long after that, I noticed that my asthma was getting worse. Got so bad that I thought I was allergic to my mom's dog, the tree outside my window, or something else in the house. To get some relief, I moved out and into an apartment. Got better almost right away, but it got worse every time I went to see my mom. She thought about it and tried to figure out what was going on. Then she found out that her neighbor was no longer living in her unit. Then the crew came to check it out. Mold that looks like black all over. There was a faucet in the kitchen that she had never fixed, shared a wall with my mom's kitchen. The neighbor won't pay a dime because it cannot be proven that her unit is the source, even though the smell is only coming from her unit and the wall they share. She just moved out and is now living with her new boyfriend. She didn't clean up the mold when she moved out. It's been hard for my mom to get the neighbor held responsible and maybe even kicked out of the units because of the HOA and town rules. It took a year before my mom could get justice. The neighbor was forced to make repairs, which cost probably thousands of dollars. She was also fined for harming the health of others, in particular me, and the HOA kicked her out right after she made the repairs. She was a bad neighbor because she yelled, fought, and called the police all the time. But she's the worst neighbor I've ever known because she doesn't respect anyone but herself. I've also lived in different kind of college town apartments. I used to live in a building with about 120 apartments. I lived there with my wife before. The penthouse was 140 square meters and had a huge terrace. I chose to have a house party with my neighbors to get to know them since I didn't know them. That's when things went wrong. Soon after the party, the local HOA decided to change how maintenance costs would be split. Instead of paying based on the number of people living in the building, the costs would be split based on the square footage of each apartment. Now, keep in mind that the HOA leader lives in a 45 square meter apartment with her husband, 3 kids, and her grandparents, while I only live with my wife in a 140 square meter. I used to pay 30 euros a month, but all of a sudden, I had to pay 140 euros. Why should my wife and I pay more than 3 times as much for cleaning and the lift as the girl who lives with 5 people and uses the same service? I thought that was unfair and brought it up. When I brought up the problem in a calm way, the HOA told me, when you have an expensive apartment, you're going to pay for it. That made me mad. I learned that what they did was against the law, so I stopped paying. I went to court and I won. Things had to be changed back to how they were. After 6 months, the HOA leader and his family had to leave. I had an HOA that was extremely corrupt. As a typical example of a busybody, the sitting president was constantly checking things like the length of the lawn. It was as simple as being friendly to my neighbors that I was able to win the election for president. She still managed to get a seat on the board, but she was unsuccessful. After she had been elected to office, I quietly informed her that she would resign from the board and never run again, or else I would cite her for the major rule violation that she had committed, which no one had known about. If she were to fix it, it would cost her tens of thousands of dollars. During the subsequent meeting, she tendered her resignation, and I followed suit and resigned immediately after her. My property was put up for sale the very next day after I left the meeting, which was held the day before. I moved back into town, which is only 2 miles away from my place of employment, and I no longer have to deal with a homeowners association. However, I do miss my 5 acres of rural land, but instead of taking 45 minutes, my commute takes only 5 minutes. Each day, I was able to reclaim nearly 1.5 hours of my life. I have no regrets at all. I'm very, very glad to see you all in the comments again. Many, many thanks for your support.